There we go. So now you can hear me, inshallah. So what we were talking about was really the part about these ayat. We were talking about al-wilaya. So when we talk about al-wilaya, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء. So this is a very sensitive topic because when we're speaking about not taking Yahud, the Jews and the Christians as awliya, especially for those that are basically living in a country that's predominantly non-Muslim, countries that rule by, of course, different laws that contradict Islam, etc. It can be not only affecting the culture or not only the social dynamic, the politics, etc., but without us realizing, it sometimes can be really hard to maintain that line of where does it begin, where does it end, and not everyone is necessarily opposing / disrespecting or not being inclusive to you as a Muslim. So how do we deal with it? And what about those that are standing in direct opposition, direct disrespect? How far can we maintain and honor ourselves or even defend ourselves and so forth? So when you look at that piece in where وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُم مِّنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ, and whoever is taking them as the place of authority or the place of direction, then he's part of them. So that's where that question comes in. How far are we talking about that borderline? Where's that borderline at? We definitely know that the ayah was really straightforward in Surah Al-Mumtahina. We went there and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and whoever doesn't fight you for your deen, doesn't expel you out of your homes, then there is no sin. In fact, you have to. Let's look at that ayah. So that's 126. Just remember that page of it. And we're going to go to that ayah that we were talking about. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's look at that ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's see, where's okay. لا ينهاكم الله. Here's that ayah that I was talking about. لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين ولم يخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم وتقسطوا إليهم إن الله يحب المقسطين. إنما ينهاكم الله عن الذين قاتلوكم في الدين وأخرجوكم من دياركم وظاهروا على إخراجكم أن تولوهم ومن يتولهم فأولئك هم الظالمون. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forbid you from those that did not fight you in your faith and did not expel you from your homes to act in justice with them. And for the Lord Almighty loves those that act in justice. For the Lord Almighty forbids you forbids you from not fighting. عن الذين قاتلوكم. In other words, forbids you from being in a form of al-birr. In other words, what you have to do for those that had fought you because of your faith, expelled you out of your homes, and insisted, in other words, had an agenda to expel you out of your homes. They basically did all their, put in all their efforts to expel you out of your homes, to kill you, to basically harm you. And those are the people that you do not want to whatsoever take them as authority, do not want, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want you to take them as a place of, helping you and or giving you the instructions, giving you the directions, giving you the support, etc. For the people that would take them as within al-wilaya, those are the people that are oppressors. Now, having that being said, that's why I basically chose this article to kind of, I would say, explain the different parameters of how we deal with those that are disbelievers. So we went in certain details last time, and we talked about what is called the taqiyya. We mentioned that one, and we said, well, it's basically when you're in a situation where there is some form of political pressure, let's say some danger on your life, danger on your health, and danger on your property, where you couldn't speak and display your religion in public in fear of perhaps your security being at risk, your family's security, your family's situation, your property being at risk. So in that situation, we said that your options are really two. There's the option of al-azima, and which is determination, when you're determining to stay consistent with your faith and not necessarily display something else, as of course for security. But you're determining that, no, I'm going to display what I believe in, even if that meant that my life would be at risk. I might lose my life. I might lose my wealth. I might lose my job. I might lose perhaps so many different privileges, but I'm going to stay determined and I'm going to be consistent with whatever I believe is what I'm going to be displaying. So that's al-azima. On the other hand, there's a rukhsa, and we had talked about the different situations where it's with Ammar ibn Yasir, how he was tortured, both his parents were killed because they were displaying Islam, and certainly they didn't have the backup to support them or protect them, so that's why they were an easy target by the pagan Arab. And the Prophet ﷺ tells him, وَإِنْ عَادُوا فَعُدْ, after, of course, Ammar ibn Yasir had basically said the word kubal, which basically is a form of displaying that he had believed in Hubal, which was the deity that the pagan Arab were believing in. So he did mention it. In other words, he did give them what they had wanted, but the Prophet ﷺ made it really clear, if they were to torture you back, then you can go back to mentioning that word Hubal just to keep yourself protected. And we also talked about the story of the two men from Musaylim al-Kadhab. We also talked about the story of Abdullah ibn Hudhafat al-Sahmi. We mentioned a number of different stories, and we also went into different situations in situations where, of course, some of the scholars, they said, well, you cannot whatsoever have the kafirin as the ones to basically lead and be an authority over the Muslims, and the Muslims basically, whether we're speaking about executive orders or whether we're speaking about place of authority. In other words, if we're talking about, let's say, board at a masjid, okay, can we have non-Muslims be at the masjid's board? What can we do in regards to that? So according to some scholars, that no, you cannot have non-Muslims be at, let's say, a masjid board or lead you into the situations that are for you. So why not? Some of the scholars, they said, well, that contradicts the goal, and certainly the bylaws are supposed to be going in congruence with what Islam says. And if a person is not Muslim, then certainly their vision plus their application or their implementation is going to be sometimes in discrepancy with what Islam teaches. So that was the first opinion, and where even Umar ibn al-Khattab, he basically directed Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, who had taken a person to more be like a scriber, to basically lay him off because he wasn't Muslim. He felt that that was going to contradict what we're supposed to be doing and whatever position that he's taking, that's basically going to be right there contradicting our goal, our aim, and even the way that we apply it, our tools. They cannot whatsoever be in discrepancy with one another. So that was one side of it. And of course, the evidence that those scholars had used was وَلَا يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ الْكَافِرِينَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ سَبِيلًا, and what that would entail, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have the kafirin, and it is not possible that al-kafir would be in any way or shape or form be the one to be in authority, whether we're talking about executive or whether we're speaking about in a position of direction. And at the end, where that was the first opinion. Well, some went into another matter, which we talked about yesterday. Someone might display, and we know of these people as being evil or perhaps not pious Muslims, so people not really practicing integrity. And the Prophet ﷺ used to do what is called al-mudara. We went in some details yesterday in where certainly the Prophet ﷺ knew the realities of some people, but in order to avoid the harm that they might bring forward, the Prophet ﷺ was displaying some form of, let's say, not tolerance to give up on his principle, but tolerance in ways where it is not to display a form of aggression. Okay, so it's not a form of aggression, but somewhat a form displaying a form of acceptance, a form of at least, let's say, nice talk, so you would not provoke at least the evil side within this person and bring any harm onto you. So you would basically display somewhat of a smile or whatever it is in order to keep their harm away from you. And we talked about the man that the Prophet ﷺ basically said, "Bi'sa akhul al-ashira." He knew that he was a person that was just evil, of course, and this person was displaying nothing but harm. But the Prophet ﷺ, when he had greeted him, he greeted him like he was in love with him. But Sayyidah Aisha was confused, and he basically said, the worst of the people are the people that you would display kindness, display good talks with them just to avoid the harm that they might bring onto you. So just to keep that one in place. Now, of course, that does not mean whatsoever that we would be quote unquote inclusive with things that contradict our own principles. So what does that mean? If there is no harm, and if it's not, you're not worried about harm, or let's just say that there is some harm, but this is basically going to be perhaps at the expense of somebody else's rights. So what does that look like? Let's assume that someone tells you, hey, I want you to help me steal, I don't know, Fatima's property. And if you basically would accept it and somehow join with them to steal that property, thinking that, well, I don't want them to harm me. Well, you don't have the right to steal someone else's property, and not because you want to protect yourself. It doesn't give you the right to steal someone else's property. There are certain situations, just keep those in mind. Even if you were coerced to do, you do not have the right to do it. Let's write those down, okay? So there are certain things, even if you were somehow under extreme coercion, it doesn't give you the right to somehow do it because you're under coercion. Let me just write a couple of those down. Number one, we're looking at harming parents. Okay, so you cannot say, well, I'm going to harm my parents because I'm being pressured to do so. It's not that I want to do it. So that's something that you cannot do. Two, killing someone. You cannot kill someone because someone told you, if you don't kill that person, I'll kill you. You cannot commit zina and say, well, I was forced to commit zina and I was forced to engage in prostitution. And if I wasn't doing that, then I would be killed. Unless the person got raped, and that's a different story because they basically got raped and they weren't accepting it. They had no choice. And certainly when you're looking at these areas, just put them within the context of that DNAIM acronym that we would say: preservation of deen, preservation of nafs, preservation of ird, preservation of aql, etc. Just put it within that context. And certainly when you're looking at those areas, you want to keep in mind that your property is not considered of a higher value than someone else's property. So respecting someone else's property is basically considered a legal maxim in Islam. All right, let's move on with those key points. And number 4, so those were just different key points. I'm just laying it out. And, they actually did a really good job. And the good news, you know what? I can actually give you the link. And based on that link, I can show you how to get the translation. So here's the link. And then on the right side, it will give you basically these list of things, and you can choose to translate. Okay. But I'm not going to choose the English one. So here we go. Here, voila. There's that English translation for the whole thing, for the whole article if you want. Okay. But of course, for myself, I'm not going to use the English translation. It does do a good job of almost 75% or even more accuracy. So definitely look into it. All right, let's see. The other situation, of course, that, where was I? Oh no, I lost the point. Okay, the other part is the other situation, of course, if we were to have some different forms of relationship, of course, with the kuffar, what does that really look like? Can we somehow have a relationship with the kuffar in, let's say, battles, in, let's say, political alliances, and what is permissible, what is not? Number one, and we're in situations, if we're speaking about war and you needed, or that, let's say that leader needed, hold on. In situations where perhaps the leader needed to create alliances with the disbelievers on 2 conditions. Number 1, in where there is a need to use such alliances. And number 2, you would have to make sure that they are not going to be harming you. In other words, we're looking at the situation, considering the interest, the security, and definitely looking at the context, and based on that, making the final determination whether we can create such alliances with the kuffar or not. Now, here's one thing you want to keep in mind. Whether the Prophet ﷺ with Safwan ibn Umayyah created that alliance, well, it wasn't more of an alliance, but Safwan ibn Umayyah was more of a person. He was a chieftain, but he was also the head of a weapon company. So that was exactly like that. All right. But you want to keep in mind, in situations where can we use different people? Can they support us, come in to support us perhaps in fighting? So if we're a country, can they join along in the army? So then we went in differences of opinions. For the Malikiyya, considered that no, because the Prophet ﷺ had said, "Irji' falan asta'ina bi mushrik." We talked about that yesterday, when the Prophet ﷺ told him to go back, which is that man that came to the Prophet ﷺ during the Battle of Badr, asking him to basically let him join along in the Battle of Badr. But the Prophet ﷺ said no, that he couldn't join along in the Battle of Badr. But you had other scholars that considered that this was abrogated, and based on that, of course, the evidences, you could see Ibn Abdul Barr, who is also Maliki. He said that number 1 is that what they had used as the first quote, which is telling that man that wanted to join, who eventually he became Muslim and did join the war, okay? But here we're talking about irji' falan asta'ina bi mushrik, when he had rejected him a couple times. Number 1 is that there are differences of opinions on its level of authenticity. The second one is that majority of the scholars, or a number of different scholars, had said that that was abrogated by the Prophet ﷺ, who, of course, had created some alliances with the disbelievers at other times, whether we're speaking about, of course, during the Battle of Hunain, or even speaking about during al-Hudaybiyah. So there were some alliances even with non-Muslims right there to give some form of political security. And even when the Prophet ﷺ had also given the Yahud Banu Qaynuqa, the Jews of Banu Qaynuqa, when they had also given, let's just say, political or military contribution, he had given them their share. So now you could see that it is possible that we can create, as a Muslim army, as a Muslim community, create some alliances with those that we might share at least some, let's say, some interest with, but on a condition. Please be aware and please be tentative in this one. To create alliances with those that we might share certain interests with should never be at the expense of our own aqidah, period. Should never be at the expense of our own creed or the expense of our own principles. So what does that look like? If you're going to create an alliance, you want to make sure that, yes, this is how much we may contribute money, for example, for certain things, but if they would contradict our deen and contradict our principle from the very start, then we have to be really careful in how we create these alliances, because in Islam, you cannot be contradictory with your own principles. You can't live in such discrepancies. And this is important. What we see right now is that, of course, the LGBT, for example, in the US, they're the ones that right now are, I guess, somewhat along with other groups at the forefront in supporting Palestine and standing against Israel. And we're seeing a lot of Muslims get confused between where the line begins and ends. So we're seeing a lot of Muslims think, well, then in that situation, I would have to raise the pride flag in order to show that I'm also tolerant of what they think is their priority. So this is at the expense of your Islam. This is al-muwala. This is al-muwala and is certainly not permissible to do. You cannot, at the expense of a certain, let's say you are looking for a political gain. You're looking for a political gain, which is, let's say, to get Palestine, gas justice, etc. Well, fair enough. But it cannot be at the expense of saying, well, I'll raise the pride flag just so that they would raise the Palestinian flag. This is contradictory. This is وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُم مِّنكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. This is not going to be in Islam. You cannot just assume that the situation is just to support the Palestinians from getting killed. You have to recognize that to stand up, وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا أَن يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ, that the reason why they were targeted was really because they had stood up and يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ, believing in al-Aziz al-Hamid, because they stood up, rejecting what Israel's agenda was, rejecting, of course, whether it's the UN or whether it's the US or whether it's different countries, and because they had rejected that, and even the CEDAW and all those agreements, they rejected all of those, and of course that made them an easy target. And that's why you would see countries like UAE, you would see countries, even Muslim countries, Arabi countries, actually in support of Israel, because we have to keep in mind that Israel is not just a country where it is they are just trying to make a country. No, it is, and it was founded on a specific interest. The specific interest was mainly to ensure that there would be no expansion, there would be no unity within the Muslim Ummah, because that was the first foundation of it. You want to look way back. We can't live just right now without saying, well, how did this whole thing begin? This whole thing began when, of course, the Uthmani Khilafah, they had ended it, and basically the Uthmani Khilafah was ended, of course, in collaboration, and even, unfortunately, even some Arab with the Sharif Hussein and all of those basically wanted to bring about a halt, an end to the Muslim unity, and in order to do so, there are a number of things that were necessary, whether it's creating borders, whether it's dividing the ummah from being one ummah where they're all united based on Islam, to creating different nationalist groups, and where this group is perhaps Pakistani, and that group is perhaps Bengali, and that other group is Malaysian, and the list goes on, in dividing them into subgroups, then dividing the subgroups into even smaller subgroups. This person considers themselves as, well, I'm basically part of this piece of the community. I'm basically a noble person. That person is not a noble person. Then we would create more and more divisions in order to ensure that the Muslim Ummah would not unite. And Israel was basically one key thing as well, because it is known throughout history that you control that area of the land, you control the resources, you control the certain area within politically, you control a number of different movements and how the economy moves forward and so forth. You control the economy, you control the politics, you control basically the geography, you control all of that, then that means you're the superpower. So looking at that, of course, it's really important that when we speak of any type of finding alliances, it must not be at the expense of you giving up on your deen, you giving up on your principles. And this is why it's important, before we start getting into political activism, we need more people to understand their aqidah. We need more people to understand what must be said, what is permissible, what is not permissible, understand even Islamic history, understand fiqh, because if you don't have fiqh and you're getting into such political activism, and without you realizing, you're thinking that, oh, I'm here, I'm giving that space in order to gain popularity and gain acceptance, and people are accepting what I'm doing, etc. And then if it's at the expense of your deen, well, you're then paving a way not for your own hell, but you're paving a way for other people to join you in hell without you realizing. So just because it basically gained some momentum, some acceptance, where people are finding it somehow attractive to join along and hear such rhetoric, it sounds very tolerant, it sounds very very powerful, etc. That's not what Islam would necessarily consider as acceptable. So it's not by how many people are accepting such words, but it's actually what it contains in haqq. So just mentioning that one. Let's see, Tahir ibn Ashur, a Tunisian scholar, he did an outstanding job, and he said il-mawala could actually be in different ways, and where it can be externally and can be internally as well. And when we say wal-zahir, so, and it could also be externally alone, and this would basically be different circumstances. So if we're talking about a person internally having muwala on the inside, they could be on the outside. Hey, they've got, mashallah, great hijab, niqabi, mashallah, excellent Muslim appearing on the outside, but on the inside, fascinated with kufr, fascinated with fitna. On the inside, fascinated with everything that perhaps the fitna whether it's the way the culture is distributing roles, feminism, the rhetoric, and most of those, just be careful with this one, because those that are fascinated on the inside, it begins with just their heart getting exposed to all of this. So they're watching perhaps reels that are displaying this, or perhaps watching documentaries, movies, reading books, this kind of culture. That's how it starts. Then later on, of course, they start, let's say, using certain quotes. It starts affecting their minds. These quotes, they start, I guess, going to the surface with their own tongue, and where they would start using such quotes. Such quotes, oftentimes, they may not necessarily realize I would say the etymology, where this idea really traces back to. They would think, if I'm using this, I'm basically somehow showing that, for example, maybe somebody might say, well, we can't be judgmental, and not realizing that the whole idea of we can't be judgmental is coming from the whole philosophy of relativism that considers that there's no right and wrong, and that there is no specific and an absolute, or an area of an absolute resource that would necessarily, let's say, define where the where right and where wrong ends, and where they begin, and how we define ethics and so forth. And without us realizing, you could see many times they would start using such rhetoric without them realizing where this is coming from. Later on, then they go into another stage. The second stage, after using such rhetoric that they completely are clueless of where it comes from, then they go into another stage, which basically is a stage where they start taking in some words into action. They'll be selective. They'll be selective, and on what basis they'll be selective? They'll start saying that, well, this is what Islam supports, without them having ilm. But they'll start getting selective. They'll take some things that basically make them feel comfortable, and they'll start saying that this is what Islam supports, and they'll start, of course, little by little, giving up on their principles, and then the person starts shifting. Now their behavior is slowly shifting. Then, of course, it becomes an outer display, a complete display, a complete change, and then they would embrace, without them realizing, they will just be so open about that they're completely, internally and externally, right now, part of such group or that group, and then the person is completely gone. And it started out with really al-batin. It started out with al-muwala internally, and then little by little it went into the outside. There is some external, in a person might be displaying that they're not completely Muslim. They might not have a Muslim appearance, but internally you could see that this person perhaps is having a great faith on the inside. We'll talk about each and every single one. So number one, you've got 8 different situations. So bear with me right here. This is extremely important. The first situation in where a Muslim might take a certain disbelieving group, or perhaps a certain cult or a certain group, but they would take them as awliya, basically alliances, create alliances, but on the inside, let's see right here, and where أولياء له في باطن أمره ميلا إلى كفره مناوئة لأهل الإسلام وهذه الحالة كفر. So in a situation where the person is, whether internally or externally, the person is basically right there, absorbing their kufr, and certainly fighting the Muslims. They would be along with the Muslims, but you could see that they're always supporting kufr, the culture, the politically supporting them, and of course internally feeling that they want to be part of the kufr and part of their culture, etc. Then in that situation, that is kufr. So the first one, in where the Muslim is externally and internally showing support for the kuffar and certainly fighting the Muslims. That's plain kufr. Even if the person prayed, even if the person said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, the answer is yes. Even if the person said, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, that's not enough if the person is displaying if the person is displaying that they are actively fighting the Muslims, they are actively feeling that the Muslims are not superior, not in their aqidah, not in their culture, not in who they are, and certainly actively creating alliances to, let's say, undermine, to defeat the Muslims, then this is plain kufr, and this would nullify their Islam, period. The second situation is, of course, the person might somehow create alliances with the kuffar externally, and perhaps it was because there were some relatives that were involved, but this person is internally, they're not whatsoever having any support to the religion, to their culture, etc. And it's basically at times when the kuffar are openly perhaps saying words and rhetoric of animosity towards Muslim, mockery towards Muslim. In that situation, of course, this person is maintaining a relationship with the Muslim community. In other words, they're still belonging to the Muslims. They're still creating, of course, their bonds with the Muslims. But you could say sometimes, of course, they're not necessarily always feeling that they are capable of, I guess, creating some form of separation between them and their non-Muslim relatives. So although sorry about that. Although this does not necessarily mean that the person is a kafir, because you could see that the motive behind this was really to create, I guess, some relationship with their relatives, even though those relatives are mocking the religion. They're probably even enemies to Islam. And even though this is a sin, so the reason why it's a sin and not kufr is because this person is not, you could see this is the key one. The key one was this one. This person is not feeling internally to accept their religion, to accept their faith, accept what they're doing, but this person is just having this relationship, and sometimes they would be quiet about some of the things that are said because they're afraid that they might have, I guess, a retaliation from relatives, etc. Then in that situation, this is a sin and not necessarily kufr. So the previous one was kufr. Why was it kufr? Because this person was somehow, this is the key right there, this person was somehow wanting or considering that kufr was superior, that of course their behavior, their culture, they are superior, and therefore basically succumbing to that. But this person, no, he's not accepting that. He's not accepting internally, he's not accepting that. But there was this, let's say, external pressure because of the relatives being involved. So this person couldn't really stand up to protect and to support the deen. So in that situation, they definitely are committing a sin by them recognizing that this is what they're doing, which is right there standing up and being mocking the religion, etc. They were supposed to keep distances. They were supposed to stand up and say, listen, I do not tolerate that you speak about my faith in that way. You have to respect the faith. If you don't respect the faith, I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to stand up for you. I'm not going to, I don't know, be at your wedding or whatever it is. All these different things is basically a way to support the religion. And definitely, if the person, people have different personalities. If the person was incapable of, let's say, stopping this intolerant, this type of an abusive behavior, or at least this type of behavior where it's not being tolerant, and this intolerance against Islam and Muslims if they're not capable of stopping them. And, people have different personalities. Some people are weaker, some people are stronger, and some people that just know how to put a stop and an end and basically end any aggression or even any intolerant behavior from others. Some people just don't know how to do it. So in that situation, the person is, like I said, committing a sin because he was or she was, they were basically afraid of the harm that they might bring against him or her. So in that situation, what they were supposed to be doing is standing up for the faith. Let's see the third situation. The third situation, because of a relationship. So this person is doing the same thing. They are showing some tolerance or some alliances with the kuffar, and it was again for different reasons. You've got different relatives that were involved, but this person is not internally accepting their religion. In other words, still holding on to their Islam. This person is holding on to his Islam. This person is committed internally and externally, but somehow they created alliances with these people because they were really relatives. And these people, unlike the first group, they were relatives, but they were really showing obvious animosity and mockery towards the religion of Islam. This group, on the other hand, was not actually showing that. This group, on the other hand, was displaying something else. They were displaying tolerance towards the religion. They were supporting at least the Muslim rights. They would go into rallies to support justice, human rights, and justice, and all of that, and even be probably some of the best to even support the Muslims in Palestine and the Muslims in China and the Muslims in, I don't know, Myanmar, whatever it is, all there. And they'll be the first ones to say, no, this is not acceptable. This is not what we believe in. They could be relatives and they could be not relatives. They don't have to be relatives alone. All right. Well, that's the same thing in where you had some of the Christian Arab in the beginning of Islam. They were also displaying tolerance towards the Prophet ﷺ. And that's why the ayah was revealed. وَلَا تَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِّلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّا نَصَارَى. Where the ayah was revealed, you will find the ones to have the most tolerance, the ones to have the most affection towards the believers are the ones to basically say that they are Christian or they are Nasara, basically from Nazareth. Basically, that was the word that was the word used to describe the Christians. Okay, and it's the same thing. And when the Muslims were in Abyssinia, the ones to protect the Muslims were the Christians, the Orthodox Christians in Abyssinia / Ethiopia. So we could see that there was some history and some history where the Muslims were protected sometimes and even created alliances with non-Muslims because they were tolerant. And certainly there are many different cases, but in situations such as that, you would just make sure that there is no hidden plot to sometimes harm the Muslims. But in this situation, it is definitely not kufr to somehow create such alliances, but you want to be really careful. You want to really be careful because this type of istihsan, this type of tolerance can sometimes bring about, I guess I would say, a relationship. And I saw that on university campuses where a lot of the Muslims were starting, and especially the younger generation, and especially girls, sorry ladies, but I guess it's part of our own psychology where we're always seeking social acceptance. And when, of course, the LGBT, the feminist groups, they might stand up for Palestine. So you would see these girls embracing embracing these I guess student student lobbies or whatever it is, and then without them realizing that they had basically went to their activities, they went and joined them, and little by little they'll start, of course, being so social about it, and then they would forget how to keep that fine line between social acceptance, political acceptance, and even between religious tolerance. So they would see this tolerance, then they would start, of course, that laughter, they would start that happiness, and all of a sudden they would blend with them entirely. And I mean entirely. And little by little, you should see the hijab is flying off, the girl's shaving half her head, now she's starting to put the piercing, now here comes the tattooing, now she's displaying herself as perhaps, somebody that has a different orientation and so forth. And you started out, what really happened? It really started out with, yes, these people were accepting us and accepting us. They were tolerant of us. They were supporting Palestine, etc. And it really is a really, I would say, a tricky place because we see this all the time on college campuses where it's the fitna, believe me, is actually coming more from this area than this area. This is real. This area is, let me say, overtly displaying the animosity, the hatred towards Muslims. There's nothing to question about that. But this area, yes, they are very tolerant. They're not fighting us. They're very, very tolerant. But then, without us realizing, it becomes a place of fitna. Sorry, ladies, but I had seen it more in women than anyone else. Sorry, ladies. We're very social, and sometimes we just don't know how to draw these lines and borders, and we want to make sure that people are accepting us and we're accepting people and that we're tolerant of others. And without us realizing, we sometimes blend too deeply where we're giving up our own identity because we would feel that that's basically to show tolerance, that's to show we're accepting, with that to show that we're being inclusive, and without us realizing, we could see the fitna coming in. Let's continue the fourth situation. Of course, we would have some form of political alliance. And the reason for that, and of course, it would be for a certain group, and the person is attempting to do what? They created these political alliances in order to harm other Muslims. And what did they do? Well, they wanted to basically create a political support, political alliance with the disbelievers against a group of Muslims. So what does that look like? Well, you saw how the coup in Egypt happened. The coup in Egypt basically was all against really Sisi, who was part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and certainly it was gaining, of course, some acceptance from, of course, even the US didn't want to call it a coup because to them it was worth standing against the Muslim Brotherhood that basically won democratically. But to, of course, the West, they would not necessarily want to use the whole ideas of democracy and human rights and all of that, and would consider that it doesn't apply to the other countries, that we are in at least in opposition to. It's basically considering kind of like what is that guy called? It's all about interest. If our interest means that we would give up on our own principles of human rights and democracy because our own interest basically goes in alliance with Sisi, well, we're going to use that. We don't care about principle. They're not going to be consistent with their principles because after all, they're not even Muslim. They don't necessarily believe in a principle. The principle, it would basically bend whenever the interest and whenever the situation requires doing so. So just keeping that one in mind. All right. So in that situation, is that the person, do we necessarily rule that that person is necessarily kafir? So we would look at of course, the different circumstances. And Imam Malik basically considered if a person is, committing espionage or perhaps spying for the kuffar, basically against the Muslims, doing that situation, some kind of treason. And in that situation, we're going to look into their case. And based on the case, we're going to see the motive. Is the motive to undermine Muslim power, or is it to perhaps undermine a certain group, or is it a personal tension? What really is the cause behind all of that? So that's basically going to determine whether the person is kafir or whether the person is still Muslim. So looking at the situation, and we're not necessarily going to say, well, do I have to first do an interview? It doesn't have to be done through an interview. We could see the words themselves, we could see the behavior, we could see the plans, we could see the agenda, and that's going to speak for itself. We don't necessarily have to ask the person, hey, can you tell us what you feel about that? Can you tell us what you think? SubhanAllah, there was Sharawi. Sharawi said something really interesting. Who's the Sharawi? Sharawi is an Egyptian scholar and a mufassir. And he is pretty much the main person that inspired me to do tafsir. And he was saying that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes, listen to this, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes al-zalimin, the oppressors, he punishes the oppressors by oppressors. Why? Because the good people don't know how to do it. The good people are too affectionate, they're too good, that many times they don't really know how to, let's say, teach al-zalimin a lesson. They don't know how to teach al-zalimin a lesson. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? He lets other zalimin basically get involved because those zalimin, they're just so such oppressors that they know no principle. So he'll let the zalimin basically go against the zalimin, and that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically support those that are masakin, those that are basically abused. Just keep that one in mind. Let's see, number 5. If the Muslims are taking certain kuffar, certain disbelievers as their alliance in order to support the Muslims against another enemy. So then what are they doing? They're basically creating an alliance with a certain kafir group against another kafir group, okay? And that other kafir group, okay, is showing tolerance to the Muslims. So what are we looking at? We're, of course, let's see. And what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to support the Muslims. So just like when right now we're seeing a lot of maybe Jewish groups, a lot of Christian groups, a lot of different lobbies that are pro-Palestine or probably against Islamophobia, and they would be pro-Islam but not necessarily Muslim. And then in that situation, that would be permissible. How is this one different than that one? So from this one, you could see that you could see, I guess it kind of aligns with this one somehow. All right, it aligns with it, but this one is, I guess there's a certain group, you're supporting a certain group, you're somehow creating political / military alliance, but the other one was more of a, let's call it social alliance. This is different than this one, where this one is political alliance / military alliance. This one, where was it? This one? Yeah, was it this one? No, where was it? Where was it? Well, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So that's the difference. The difference is one was showing political alliance and the other one was social. Okay. That one is permissible. And some Malikis, they regarded that's not permissible to somehow create an alliance with the disbelievers in order to fight another disbelieving group. So just keep that one in mind. Let's see the sixth situation. أن يتخذ واحد من المسلمين واحدا من الكافرين بعينه وليا له في حسن المعاشرة أو لقرابة لكمال فيه أو نحو ذلك. What does that mean? So basically one Muslim would take another kafir as a wali lahu, like an example, celebrity, or perhaps a person that they would take as, I guess, a supporter, special relationship between him and this other person. Why? Well, they took him so because they had certain good qualities. They were probably good in their akhlaq, or perhaps this person is a relative, or perhaps they just had certain, I guess, certain characteristics, certain characteristics that were attractive, that I guess went in accordance with Islam, but this person is still not Muslim. Okay, and of course, من غير أن يكون في ذلك إضرار بالمسلمين, on a condition that this person is not harming the Muslims. You know, this one is really, I know, you know, at one point, Jordan Peterson was doing an outstanding job until he displayed his anti-Islamic and completely anti-Islam. And it was just a shock how this person was really showing good character, showing a lot of emotions, showing a lot of, I guess, honesty in how he was willing to stand up against a lot of the liberal culture that is becoming a trend. But then when he started supporting, of course, anti-Muslim groups, that's when it was a place of question. So when the person is not displaying anti-Islamic rhetorics or anti-Islamic motives, then in that situation, it would be permissible to show some form of affection, some form of al-wilaya, some form of a relationship, if the person is not displaying, of course, harm, and they had basically good tolerance to the Muslims. So that's exactly like how the ayah was talking about the parents. وإن جاهدك على أن تشرك بما ليس لك به علم فلا تطعهما وصاحبهما في الدنيا معروفا. And if your parents would fight you, and you're talking about a parent here really literally fighting, literally harming, really abusing their own child, to do what? To really engage in kufr. The father and the mother, they're beating up their child just because they don't want them to be Muslim. And then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا, don't obey them in that regards. وَصَاحِبُهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا, but maintain good relations in this dunya on good terms. But here's the thing, but these people are actually fighting this person, but they still had definitely contributed in this person's life with many good things. So you just have to, I guess, in return, still maintain صاحبهما في الدنيا معروفا. All right, let's see. Asma bint Abi Bakr as well, she asked the Prophet ﷺ whether she can be barra, whether she can maintain good relations and visit her mother, who was not even Muslim. The Prophet ﷺ tells her, Sili ummaki. And he said, Sili ummaki, visit your mother. You could see this hadith is basically agreed upon between Bukhari and Muslim, that it's authentic. So that's basically the application where the ayah literally says, La yanhakumullah. We just read that a while ago, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not forbid you from those that did not fight you in your faith, did not expel you from your cities, to act in al-birr. Al-birr is good conduct and basically showing tolerance. وَتُقْسِطُوا إِلَيْهِمْ. But it's important to mention that when we're speaking about showing tolerance, it doesn't mean that we're accepting the person's, let's call it, disbelief, or we're somehow accepting it and we're supporting them. So if, let's say, a person is I guess a Christian, in where a person might say, well, because they're Christian and I want to be tolerant, I'm going to buy them, a cross, or probably something that displays Christianity because that's so dear to them. That's not permissible, because to show tolerance, we're talking about perhaps if she's ill, you're visiting her on the day she's ill. If she probably needs help in paying her bills. So dunya related things is different than religious related things. Religious related things, at least don't attack the religion. At least don't display anything that is going to basically eliminate her right to practice her faith. If we're talking about a Christian, to practice her faith, she wants to go to church, you're basically telling her, yep, you can go to church right there, or probably even drop her off at church, or to her church or whatever. So in that situation, that's different. But to support her shirk, that's haram. To support the deviation, perhaps, hey, waving the pride flag, or perhaps, somehow displaying some form of support for that ideology, that would be haram, and it would contradict your deen. So can I say things like Merry Christmas, for example? The answer is no, because that's religious. That's a religious tolerance. That's a religious right there. You're basically contradicting yourself. Islam is telling you, don't contradict yourself in accepting shirk. It doesn't mean that I go to her house and take down her tree and I don't know, and take down all those lights that she put up. No, it doesn't mean that. We're not saying go and let's not use this dichotomy. Let's not use this dichotomy by saying, well, we're not necessarily displaying religious, somehow accepting the shirk. It doesn't mean that I'm telling you to go and take down their tree or a Christmas tree or whatever it is. I'm basically here saying that if you want to show religious tolerance, the part that's permissible is that you would allow them at least to practice that. That's their issue, but it doesn't mean that I would somehow support that shirk. Supporting shirk is haram. We don't support the shirk, because Islam wants you to be consistent with what you believe. Islam wants you to be consistent with your aqeedah. Islam wants you to not practice hypocrisy. Don't be a hypocrite. Really display your tawheed. You're supposed to be here carrying on the legacy of the prophets. So don't display anything to support somebody's shirk. Not to support their shirk, it doesn't mean that you're here attacking them. In fact, the ayah was really clear in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا آلِهَتَهُمْ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدُوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't attack their gods in order to basically Why can't we attack their gods? We don't believe in their gods, right? But you want to make sure that you don't incite and provoke them to attack Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't want to attack their gods if that was going to bring about an attack against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you have to be, mindful, let's say, and where and what this will lead to. So just keeping that in mind. And of course, Asma Abu Bakr, did have good relations with her mother, and things like perhaps giving that ta'ziyah, showing condolences for a person that died. This is not necessarily supporting their kufr, but hey, the person's mother died. I'm there showing them support, giving them, I guess, the condolences, giving them, giving them emotional support, etc. That's a different story. All right. Same thing when the Prophet ﷺ, many times he would sit with al-Akhnas ibn Shuraiq or Shariq. I don't really know if it's Shuraiq or Shariq, most likely Shuraiq, al-Thaqafi, when he was visiting the Prophet ﷺ. By the way, he did become Muslim later, but that's also the same thing when we're talking about the father for, what was his name? He was Sayyidah Aisha's ex fiance. Forgot what his name was, but his father was also helping the Muslims when the Muslims were boycotted by the people of Quraysh. I'll get the name. The name will come, inshallah. All right, let's see the seventh situation. We're basically exchanging in different interests. So transactions, perhaps buying, selling, perhaps maybe a doctor's visit. The doctor's probably not Muslim. So of course, we're talking about different interests there. It's not related to religion, but it's basically related to our own day-to-day life. So in that situation, we would look at the different matters and the different rulings regarding that in the books of fiqh. Finally, this is number 8, finally showing some form, let's say externally, we're showing some form of support, not because we agree with their lifestyle, but really just to keep away any harm that they might harm. And that's where that ayah gives it that exception, the situation where the person is showing some form of تَتَّقُوا مِنْهُمْ تُقَى, some form of, let's call it displaying some form of tolerance, just because the person is worried that they might harm them, perhaps maybe lay them off, perhaps maybe kill them, perhaps maybe not grant them a visa, and they might end up probably being exported to their country. And if they are exported or basically or deported, to their country, a place like Syria, they might actually kill them. So if they're deported there, then that could be, of course, putting their life in danger. So they are showing some form of, let's say, tolerance slash, keeping some form of I guess low key, and not necessarily displaying overtly some of their disagreements with the political system, with the different systems, because they're afraid that they might actually get deported and end up perhaps maybe in the hands of Sisi, in the hands of maybe Bashar al-Assad, or probably even other dictators. So they're basically somehow maintaining a low key. So that's a different situation right there. So those are the things that we wanted to talk about for the past few days. Finally, alhamdulillah, we basically completed all of this, and that takes us to completing the topic about al-awliya here. So let's go over and let's jump really quick to the ayat that we were doing. We were doing, of course, which ayah? We were doing إذا ناديتم إلى الصلاة اتخذوها هزوا ولعبا. And we went into details with that for those that, of course, when the Muslims were calling on to the prayer, they were taking that as a place of mockery. They would laugh at the Muslims. They would make of that some form of comedy, entertainment to laugh at the Muslims. Of course, this would be kufr. So if we're seeing right now, it's becoming a trend where someone is named Ahmad, is named Muhammad, Muslim, but then what they would be making their comedy about is really the Muslim community or even Islam and Muslims. That's kufr on the spot, even if their name was Ahmad or Muhammad, or even if right after their comedy session, they went to make their Qiyam al-Layl. If you had just displayed kufr, it's basically going to be that kufr that will get you out of Islam, even if you had prayed and fasted. ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يعقلون. Why would they be people that are not showing aql? What is aql supposed to be here in the context of what? Well, العقل is when a person's let's say creed is consistent with their behavior. But if a person's mind is not consistent with their behavior, then that person lacks aql. That's why you would see a lot of the teenagers, for example, because their mind or their brain is still not yet fully developed. They would barely, I mean, إِلَّا مَن رَحِمَ رَبُّكَ, and it was really, of course, something that throughout Muslim history, you would see these cases, Mus'ab ibn Umair, Ammar ibn Yasir, you know, they were young men, but they were showing that they were people of aql, even though their brain is not fully developed. But we could see today during our times, the teenagers are basically not showing this aql, not only because biologically or at least physically in their anatomy, and of course their mind and their brain is not fully developed, but also because they're not taught how to be consistent between what they are, what they're acting in other words, their behavior being consistent with what, one, with what they believe in, two, consistent with what basically brings about a good outcome in the long run. What are you planning for when you're 21, when you're 22, when you're 30? How do you invest from now? When you are 13, how do you invest from now in order to harvest when you're 24, when you're 30, at those times? And at that age, you basically start planting the seed from now when you are young. So when you look at ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يعقلون, that's basically to say that these people, when they don't even recognize the inconsistency, the discrepancies between what is a reality and between their behavior. So inconsistency between reality and behavior, or inconsistency between truth, of course, and also what they had believed and also their action. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. Okay, so did we actually, yeah, so this is actually supposed to be the end of those, for those ayat, even from Tafsir al-Qurtubi. Alhamdulillah, so good job. We are basically right at this ayah. We ended the things that relate to this ayah. So, you know, before, yeah, Alhamdulillah. So what we're going to do, I'm going to actually ask you if you have any questions, because I know the topic that we talked about is really, really sensitive. So I would love to hear if there are any questions before we end for today, because I know we took the hadith class and even this one. So many of you are right now really tired because both subjects are really, I would say, buttery, juicy. So if there are any questions before we end, I'd love to answer them, or if you have any comments as well.
Or spicy.
Oh, there you go. I guess no one has any questions.
I just have one question, sorry.
Go ahead, Noor.
So, I mean, what if the Muslims, they weren't very sure of the intentions of the other people that they are making alliances with
Fair enough.
militarily?
It's important. It's important to always recognize, number one, that whenever you would have a lobby, that they have their goal most of the times actually mentioned within their bylaws. So you would see their bylaws, you would look into their bylaws, and that's going to let you know and keep in mind that this whole world is based on التدافع. What is that? Every single group wants to promote their ideas. They want to promote their powers. They basically are seeking different ways to go in power, authority, and make this be, let me say, the trend, make this be the action that everyone is living by. So it's important to keep in mind that most groups will show tolerance when they are politically weaker. But once they grow stronger, that's when they will start holding more power in wanting to display their authority.
Right.
So just keep that one in mind. Many times we could see people deal with other political groups in a naive way, thinking that, oh, these people don't intend it. You see those seculars, you see those liberals right now, they're basically, wanting to show that they're pacifists. But once they are really in power, you will see the ugly dark side of what they really are. They would be willing to use all different forms of harm in order to basically get their ideas in place. Well, isn't that what's happening even in other countries? So just keep that one in mind. I think at many times we tend to be too shallow. We tend to be too innocent. Let's say it that way, especially as women. Sorry, ladies, but especially as women, we tend to be too innocent in the way we would deal with others, thinking they didn't mean it. It's okay. And no, you have to be alert. You have to be aware that there is no political group that is, of course, just wanting to just
help.
Just wanting to be nice. There's no such thing.
To just help for no gain.
Well, it's just an issue of time. Once they are weak, they're displaying this, so you have to be really careful. You also don't want to be, I would say, too stubborn and not realize that there's certain political games out there where sometimes your ex-enemy is going to be now probably the person that you would have to create some alliance with just because there are certain interests. So you just, you have to definitely listen to the different specialists on political science. We definitely need to learn from them on what we need to do, how to create these alliances, how to basically work towards Muslim interests and not necessarily think in a way that is rather too simplistic, rather, I would say, too shallow, but definitely, even with those that are being tolerant, you definitely have to just create.
You have to figure out what is, right?
What was that? What was that?
Don't you have to figure out what their motive is?
So, of course, every political group, their motive is to be in power.
On the law.
Why? Because there's no way that you can get your matters let's say, implemented unless you basically get in power. And that's the same thing with Muslims. Are we wanting to be in power? The answer is yes. Just like the Democrats want to be in power, just like the Republicans want to be in power, just like the the Tea Party or whatever it is. Everybody wants to be in power. Yes, we are seeking to be in power. And yes, we will work towards that, and so will they. That's sunnah to defa. This is reality.
Yeah.
Is it still seeking power? Yes, it is seeking power. Throughout history, all those wars, if you look at the World War I and World War II, there wasn't a real aggression. It was an issue of wanting to display who's in power.
Yeah.
Was that it? Hey, it's just to display who's in power. It's just to let you know I'm in power. It's to let you know that I basically determine. You look at the US today, it's basically, hey, it's not necessarily following, what I guess human rights are and what is good for humanity. No, even the US, I'm going to be putting a military base here just to let you know that I'm in power. I'm going to basically determining what goes and what comes because I'm in power. Because you don't obey my power, then that means you're a threat. Simple as that. That's the reality. So when you want to create alliances, it's important to just keep in mind that when you want to associate with any, let's say, political group, you want to keep that as low key, where it involves certain interests. We're working towards certain interests, but to engage with them in we're going to parties and making it like a social thing, I think that's where women fail. Women, many times, sorry, ladies, but this is something that I had always seen all the time, in where they don't know where the political alliance begins and ends and where social relations end. They would confuse these two. And they would go social and start the laughters and these connections. And all of a sudden, she basically forgot that this person, listen, you're just there to create a political alliance, not a social alliance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A social alliance is, if you're Muslim, your mother is not Muslim, well, I have to maintain a certain level of social alliance.
Right.
That's a non-Muslim mother, a non-Muslim sister. I've got a certain social alliance right there. But this social alliance should not go as far as, yes, we're then going farther and we're somehow, I guess, going to church together because we want to somehow so tolerance. No, yes, I'll be there for your wedding, but it doesn't mean that I'll basically, sit and hold a religious prayer together. You've got your lakum dinukum waliyadin. Once it involves, then lakum dinukum waliyadin.
SubhanAllah.
Then when it involves speaking about my religion, or even how I teach my kids the religion, then lakum dinukum waliyadin. You've got your views about what you consider as basically the right way and how we would live our life. But then, of course, if it contradicts the religion, it's okay. You can maintain your ideas on that. But what involves religion, you can keep your space. That's it. Alhamdulillah. So I hope I explained that one.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. We'll see you all. What tomorrow? What do we have tomorrow? I forgot. Do we have anything?
What